Hello, YouTube. So, what exactly is wrong with moral arbitrariness, with uh, drawing arbitrary lines, with failing to, justify your moral intuitions on the basis of principles? What exactly is wrong with that? I think that moral realists can give fairly straightforward answers to this, but I'm speaking as an anti-realist here. So, from an anti-realist point of view, what's the problem with moral arbitrariness? First of all, I should give some examples of what I mean when I say moral arbitrariness. So, it's very often the case in moral debates that people will accuse their opponents of in some way their views being arbitrary, or they've drawn an arbitrary distinction. So, for instance, in debates about animal rights, we think that it's perfectly okay to kill and eat animals. Well, a lot of people think it's perfectly okay to kill and eat animals, but they would be horrified by killing and eating humans. So the question is, well, what's the relevant distinction between animals, between like all of these animals and all humans? And if you try to appeal to particular features that distinguish human beings, you're going to find it extremely difficult to find features that are shared by all human beings, but that animals do not have. So, for example, if you say, rationality, for example, is what makes humans special, well, there are lots of humans who do not have rational capacities, like babies and the people with dementia and so on. But we don't think it's okay to kill and eat them. So the charge is that most people, the sort of standard moral view is just objectionably arbitrary. You're arbitrarily privileging humans. Another kind of case like this might be if you think about the famous trolley problem versus footbridge problem. So in the trolley problem, you have a trolley hurtling down a track towards five people who are tied on the track. You could pull a lever and divert the trolley where it will go on a track where there's one person tied to the track. And most people say, yeah, in that kind of case, right, 5 versus 1, well, it's better to kill one person. It's better for one person to die than it is for 5 people to die, so it makes sense to pull the lever, divert the trolley. But on the other hand, if you give people the footbridge case, where the trolley is hurtling down a track to 5 people, and you could push a fat man off a bridge into the path of the trolley, that will stop the trolley. It will kill the fat man, obviously, but save the 5. In that case, people are much more reluctant to sacrifice the life of one person to save 5. And then the question is, okay, like, what's the relevant difference here? And it again, it turns out to be very tricky to come up with principles, like moral principles that explain or justify our different reaction in these cases. So yeah, I mean, very often what people will do is to sort of search for relevant differences, say differences in traits between humans and animals, or sort of different features of the actions in the trolley and the footbridge case, and then they'll appeal to sort of moral principles or whatever that like justify our different reactions to these cases. So there seems, so yes, right, it like certainly in moral debates, right, when moral philosophers engage in moral debates, we try to avoid arbitrariness. And I do think that, okay, from a realist point of view, that makes sense, right? Because realists think that there are moral facts that and that we are trying to construct moral theories that tell us what the moral facts are. So yeah, I guess it makes sense that from that point of view, you would evaluate moral theories by the same standards that we evaluate other theories of the world. So, a realist might say something like, well, our moral intuitions are analogous to our perceptual observations. And, so we sort of treat our moral intuitions as data, and then we come up with moral principles that try to accommodate those intuitions, and we weigh the principles. We sort of weigh the principles against the intuitions and against these sort of just general theoretical virtues of simplicity, explanatory power, coherence with background beliefs, non-ad hocness. Until we eventually get this like reflective equilibrium, where we have a sort of set of moral principles that best accommodates our intuitions. And of course, what we want is ideally, I mean, if we're sort of modeling moral inquiry on the way we go about other kinds of inquiry into the world, yeah, I mean, we're going to want a sort of set of, simple principles that are, kind of maybe analogous to like the laws of nature, right? Simple principles that are not going to just be like, yeah, and so you're not going to be just drawing arbitrary distinctions between things. There's going to be some like reason, if it is the case that it's okay to kill any animals, there must be some reason why. There must be some, relevant difference between animals and humans. Okay, that makes sense from a realist point of view. But again, I'm an anti-realist. So as an anti-realist, I think, okay, like, why, right? Why should I do this? Why do I need to do this? Why shouldn't I just draw arbitrary lines? I mean, why do I need to construct a moral theory of any kind at all? Like, why shouldn't I just say, I just happen to care about humans and I don't care about animals, right? Why shouldn't I just say that and just leave it at that? Or in the footbridge versus the trolley case. Look, I just kind of feel icky about pushing a person off a bridge, right? But I don't feel icky about pulling a lever, right? And I disapprove. I feel icky about other people who would be willing to push people off bridges, right? But I don't feel icky about people who are willing to pull levers, right? Like that's it. That's all it is. That's why I think it's okay to to pull the lever in the trolley case, but not to push the fat man in the footbridge case, right? Like it's just like that action. Yeah, like I don't want to do that. There's something icky about that. Right, I mean that incidentally is my actual reaction, right? I do in fact feel icky, and the question is why can't I just leave it at that? I mean maybe I could come up with sort of moral principles that justify these judgments, but why do I need to, right? Well, so the worry is, well, if you just leave it at that, then it's going to be arbitrary, right? Like if you can't present some morally relevant difference between these cases, then you have this problem of arbitrariness. So what? I mean, if we think about other cases where I have preferences about things, where I have sort of values and attitudes, arbitrariness doesn't seem to be a problem. So, like, let's say, for instance, you're talking to someone about music, and they say like that they just hate 80s pop. Right, they hate 80s pop. They say it's soulless and commercial and it sounds terrible. Like gated reverb, synths, right? They just like everything about 80s pop. They just can't stand it, right? But then they say that they absolutely love the song Karma Chameleon. It's one of their favorite songs, right? And so, I mean, now how would you respond to that? I mean, well, you could point out that Karma Chameleon is a sort of paradigm 80s song, like, I mean, and maybe it would be a little bit puzzling for someone to say that they hate 80s music but they love Karma Chameleon. But then I don't know, that's not that unusual, right? Very often this is how people's tastes work, right? Very often, there will be these just sort of weird cases where they just happen to like something when it seems like on the basis of their other preferences they should dislike it. What is this person going to say when you point out that Karma Chameleon is a paradigm 80s song? I mean, are they going to be like, oh, well, in that case, I guess I better adjust my preferences so that I either come to dislike Karma Chameleon or I come to like 80s music in general? I mean, that would be strange, right? And it would be strange to sort of to kind of think that you can persuade someone to change their mind about liking Karma Chameleon by saying that, well, your music preferences, include an arbitrary exception for karma chameleon, right? I mean, so what, right? Like, okay, why should I care about that? And they may not be able to identify any particular feature that distinguishes Karma Chameleon from other 80s music, but so be it. They dislike most 80s music, but they just happen to really like Karma Chameleon for reasons that they themselves don't even know. Um, so, I mean, at the very least, right? Like, it's not then obvious why anti-realists would be troubled by arbitrariness, because in other domains where when it comes to domains where we recognize that there aren't like objective facts, or well, I mean, I guess some people think that there are objective facts about aesthetic value, but like obviously when people are just expressing their own music tastes, they're not trying to describe objective facts, right? They're just expressing their own music tastes. And in those sort of domains, arbitrariness doesn't seem to be a problem. So, what is the problem? I guess the thought might be, well, there's going to be some sort of practical drawback to moral arbitrariness. So here are a couple of thoughts. One thought we might have is, well, the point of moral theorizing is to kind of figure out what to do. Like moral theories do serve some sort of practical function, and one of the reasons why I might engage in moral theorizing is so I can figure out, what to do, so I can figure out how to act. In particular, although there are some cases where I have strong feelings, like maybe I feel strongly that you ought not to push the guy off the bridge and you ought to pull the lever, there will be other cases where I'm just unsure. And so one reason why I might want to come up with moral principles is so that I can figure out what to do in these cases. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe that works. I think so I think there are a couple of problems with this kind of response. The first is that moral principles actually are not always going to help, and in some cases are going to make things worse. So, for instance, let's say you come to endorse some sort of utilitarian principle where you say, well, you're going to act on the principle that you are just going to maximize happiness for the greatest number of people. Well, there's going to be loads of situations where it's just unclear what action is going to maximize happiness. So, like, even if you have a principle that is not in any way, or at least not in any obvious way, arbitrary, you're still going to face plenty of situations where it's just unclear what that principle demands of you, so it's not going to help you decide what to do. More seriously, though, I think you don't actually need to appeal to these principles to figure out what to do. There are other ways of doing that. So if I face a situation where I'm unsure about what to do, I might, I don't know, ask somebody else, or I might think about what somebody else would do. What would Jesus do? Like, that's the sort of thing people ask themselves, right? Or you just, you might sort of proceed instead of by like trying to come up with a moral principle. You might just sort of compare it to other cases that seem salient, right? Like when I face some sort of dilemma where I'm unsure, like I see somebody injured on the road and I wonder how much to help them. I could just compare it to other cases without appealing to principles, and that might influence how I feel and help me decide what to do. So yeah, I mean, and like at the end of the day, I mean, when it comes to deciding what to do, drawing arbitrary distinctions can be just as useful as having these like non-arbitrary principles. So if I am explicit about the fact that, for example, I care about humans and I don't care about animals, well, that makes it very easy to decide what to do when it comes to questions about like, well, should I kill and eat this animal? I mean, certainly it's going to be easy to decide what to do with respect to like the moral status of the animal, right? So yeah, I don't think that that appealing to the role of moral theories or moral principles in helping me to decide what to do explains why I should care about arbitrariness. here's another thought, and this is what I always used to sort of think, was that, well, the reason why I'm going to try to avoid arbitrariness is because if I'm drawing these sort of arbitrary lines, right? If I'm not able to appeal to like principles that justify my moral views, it's going to make it a lot harder to promote those moral views to other people, right? So, really, this is just a point about like persuasion and promotion of my moral attitudes. So I tended I guess what I used to assume was, look, most people want their moral views to be consistent and non-arbitrary. They want to be able to defend them, to other people who might have different perspectives. So, they're not going to accept a moral system if it draws these sort of arbitrary lines. Um, the problem with this, well, first of all, I think that actually most people probably don't care about arbitrariness. I suspect that it's really only philosophers and other people who are sort of inclined to think philosophically who consider their normative commitments deeply enough to even notice when their views are like arbitrary, right? To even notice when this is a problem. But I am very skeptical that like most people really care about this. I mean, most people, when they make moral judgments, I suspect they're doing all sorts of things. Sometimes they might just be expressing emotional attitudes. Sometimes they might be sort of thinking about what's in their self-interest or in their group interest. Sometimes they might be kind of engaging in this sort of tribal signaling. So they want to sort of show that they appropriately conform to the standards of their group. I mean, in general, I think people want to signal that they are reliable, that they can be trusted, and that's going to involve showing that they conform to certain social norms and so on. And so, like, if you think about our culture, well, it just so happens to be the case that one way that you sort of signal that you like signal good character is by showing that you have concern for animals in certain contexts, or like concern for certain kinds of animals. So you'd better be concerned, like if somebody, if somebody sort of has a video of them feeding a dog to a snake, well, you'd better be enraged about that. But if it's somebody feeding a mouse to a snake, who cares? Or if it's somebody eating a cow, who cares, right? Because those aren't the animals that matter to us in this culture, right? Like our culture cares about dogs, so of course, you signal that you are appropriately conforming to the cultural norms by also caring about dogs. Anyway, the point is obviously you don't need moral principles to do any of this, right? And the other thing about this appeal to sort of so the other point about the idea that arbitrariness will make it harder to promote one's moral views is so the problem is that no matter what principles my moral views are based on, most people are going to reject those principles, right? So if I come up with some sort of moral theory which contains principles that tell us what the difference is between the footbridge case and the trolley case, right? Most people are probably going to reject those principles because that's just the case. That's just how it is with every moral theory that everyone's ever come up with, right? Like, most people reject utilitarianism. Most people reject Kantianism. Most people reject contractarianism. None of these have managed to achieve a sort of general consensus. In fact, most people, I say most people reject them. Most people haven't even thought of them. But I mean, among the people who have thought of them, most people end up rejecting those theories. In fact, I did a video called Animals Don't Matter, where I tried to argue for a kind of contractarian sort of viewpoint. And, part of that video was people had asked me in the past, why I'm not vegan. I don't particularly care about animals, right? Like that was my stance. I don't really care. And of course, being a philosopher, I'm able to play the game of coming up with justifications. So I was happy to do that. And in that video, I tried to argue from this sort of contractarian viewpoint, where I was like, well, you know, what matters is we want to have like, so ultimately, you know, I was thinking of it in terms of like long run self-interest, right? So it's like, what sort of rules are going to promote the self-interest of rational agents? You know, that was essentially the idea. But the point in this context is, who the hell's going to accept contractarianism in the first place, right? You know, so if I was successful in that video, then what I managed to do was come up with a, you know, consistent moral system that was able to non-arbitrarily, you know, draw a line between humans and non-human animals, right? But I did that on the basis of this moral theory that like nobody's going to accept. I mean, like nobody except like I mean, yes, a few people are going to accept it, but like mainly just sort of psychopaths and autistic people. That's basically the only people who are going to find that moral theory appealing, right? So it's like, I mean, having these sort of non-arbitrary principles, that's not going to help to change anybody's mind if they don't accept the principles that I'm arguing from. And I think as it happens, whatever principles you choose, most people are going to reject them. So yeah, so I'm still left with like, look, I just don't see why I should care about arbitrariness. It doesn't really seem to have any practical drawbacks, at least relative to having a like principled non-arbitrary system. So I guess what we're left with is just the, you know, naked assertion that like arbitrariness is irrational. But I mean, okay, yeah, I mean, maybe if you're a realist, you can say that, but like, I don't think, I mean, I'm not sure an anti-realist can say that, like, because, I mean, unless you want to say that it's irrational for someone to, you know, enjoy 80s pop in general, but then really love Karma Chameleon, you know, like, or it's like irrational. Like, if I say that you know, if I happen to dislike garlic flavor in general, but then I really like garlic bread, like, that's irrational. I mean, you know, no, right. That's not how those things work. Of course, look, you know, I mean, here's the thing, right? I may be an anti-realist, but I am also a philosopher, and I mean, yeah, it's important for philosophers to come up with moral principles that, you know, apply in all different possible situations, and that are able to, like, you know, show that their intuitions and, or at least that their moral judgments are not arbitrary. You know, we as philosophers want to construct moral theories that, you know, deliver the right results, in the sense that they, you know, conform with our intuitions, and that they score best in terms of the theoretical virtues. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's nothing wrong with constructing moral theories like this. And I have even sometimes enjoyed playing that game myself. But, you know, philosophers are just one specific linguistic community, and like and I'm, yeah. So I don't really see what the big deal is with moral arbitrariness, and that's what I have to say in this video. Okay, goodbye.